Time to have a look at the newspapers right around the world now. Greece first, not surprisingly perhaps. Elena, what are the international papers making of the result there?
Let's start in Greece, shall we? Where most of the papers, it's fair to say, are quite relieved at New Democracy having come top, giving the Greeks another chance to renegotiate their bailout to kind of keep themselves in the euro. But at the same time, they're concerned that they'll find it impossible to reach any kind of governing coalition and that we'll have weeks of indecisive talks, just after, like we saw after the last election. Tanea, they've got a headline, former government immediately. It's time for the parties and their leaders to face up to their responsibilities. Ethnos goes for a similar line. They've got time for a stable government as a headline, and Katimerini has New Democracy wins but faces challenges to govern. They're saying there, of course, that they need to form a coalition. They need PASOK, the socialists who came third, to do that, really. PASOK say they won't join a government without Syriza. Syriza, the far-left group who did extremely well in this election, say they would rather remain in opposition, so it looks like a bit of a headache. The editorial of Katimerini says the politicians need to go well beyond people's expectations. They need to just put the national interest before their party interests, and just maybe Greece will now get finally a good surprise out of its politicians.
And presumably internationally, the focus is more kind of on the whole future for the euro.
Yes, Greece gives Europe a chance, headlines The Guardian. They explain in their editorial that really this isn't a great deal different now, the euro situation, from how it was before the election, because New Democracy, of course, have planned to more or less abide by those bailout plans that Greece has already agreed to. They say essentially that now something has to change at the European level at this G20 meeting. Either Germany's got to accept higher inflation to try and make up the difference between its economy and southern Europe, or they've got to indulge in a serious fiscal transfer of money to try and help bail out those southern European governments even more. Otherwise, they will be pulling out of the euro pretty soon, and that will be catastrophic. The Independent headlines on the Greeks finally agree to austerity as a headline today, but they reckon in their editorial that won't necessarily change what Germany does. Even New Democracy, the Conservatives who've come top, want to renegotiate those bailout terms, and there's no guarantee Angela Merkel's going to let them. In their cartoon today, they've got a Greek statue kind of collaring her and stopping her as she heads off with a saw to make more budget cuts to Greece's poor economy. But Die Welt, a conservative German paper who normally backs Angela Merkel, says in its editorial today that Germans have to realise why they're so hated. A Greek tabloid had Angela Merkel in a Nazi uniform on its front page at the weekend, and it says Germany's got to realise where those attitudes come from and stop being so intransigent.
OK, well, let's look at some more attitudes. This time we're talking about Egypt. What are the papers saying about that?
Well, Al Aram, Egypt's most widely read paper, asks how much power will this new president actually have then? Something we've been talking about a lot this morning after those constitutional reforms pushed through by the army last night. They've given themselves the power to make laws, make legislative decisions, appoint a constituent assembly that will then draft a new constitution for Egypt, arrest people at will and so on. So can the new president actually do anything, or will they be symbolic? They say if Morsi is elected, we're heading for a massive showdown between him and the army, as he'll be forced to answer to Field Marshal Tantawi, head of the ruling military junta, for everything he tries to do. Over at Arabist, they say they've talked to a constitutional lawyer who's an expert in Egypt's constitution. They reckon this is probably illegal, the move that they made last night, and it certainly can be classed as a military coup.
And for a lot of people that were involved, of course, in the process in Tahrir Square last year, I mean, this is kind of the worst case scenario for them, isn't it?
It really is. In the Egypt Independent, they have an article saying that the revolutionaries have to take a fair amount of responsibility for this. They reckon that the supposed conflict between Mohammed Morsi and the army isn't really going to happen because Morsi and the Muslim Brothers will be quite happy to toe the army's line. They share a lot of conservative goals and both want to suppress the revolutionaries, even though Morsi's benefited from their support now. But they say the revolutionaries have a lot to blame in having divided their vote between different candidates and more broadly having failed to agree on what they wanted out of this revolution. And the Egyptian novelist Adaf Suif, writing in The Guardian, talks about what those revolutionaries should be doing next. She says it's time for them to get back on the streets and keep protesting. The people, she says, have been right all along. They demonstrated when it was needed, and now it's needed again. Otherwise, the revolution will be over.
Egypt and Greece, top of the agenda on the international newspapers today. Elena, thanks very much.